I had just stepped into the flower shop of my old friend Silas when he looked at me with a strange expression. He didn't greet me like he always did. Instead, he grabbed my shoulders tightly. His face was pale. Silas whispered urgently, "Garrick, get into the storage room right now. Hide behind those wooden crates. Don't ask any questions. Just stay quiet and listen." Before I could understand what was happening, the bell above the flower shop door rang. Ding dong. That familiar sound echoed today like a death knell. Through a narrow crack in the storage room door, I saw my wife walk in. Meredith. Beside her was Preston, my polished son-in-law with a law degree from Harvard. Without even greeting Silas, her eyes immediately landed on the yellow roses sitting on the table. She picked one up with 2 fingers. Her gaze was filled with contempt. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter laugh I had never heard in 40 years. "Look at this, Preston. Cheap yellow roses again. Old Garrick always thinks these outdated things can make up for his lack of imagination. For 40 years I've had to put up with this stinginess." Preston smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. He adjusted his collar, his voice brimming with confidence. "Don't worry, Mom. Tonight, after the birthday party, everything will be over. The estate planning documents are ready. The old man will sign them without the slightest suspicion. He trusts you. He trusts me. The moment that signature hits the paper, the entire real estate portfolio and the family fund will belong to us. The old man will have nothing left except the $12 bouquet he brings home." Meredith threw the rose onto the table. Petals scattered everywhere. "That's right. I've endured enough. It's time that old man pays for his stubbornness." The clicking of pruning shears, the rustling of wrapping paper, every sound inside Silas's flower shop suddenly became as sharp as a razor blade. Just minutes earlier, I had walked in with a smile on my face. Today was Meredith's birthday. I wanted to surprise her with a bouquet of yellow roses, a symbol of 4 decades together, but now the blood in my veins felt frozen. Every word they spoke was like a knife plunging into my chest. The woman who had shared every hardship with me. The son-in-law I had treated like my own son. They were standing there separated from me by only a wall deciding the fate of my life and my fortune. I gripped the edge of a wooden crate so hard that my palms began to bleed. The betrayal was too great. It went beyond the limits of what any human being should have to endure. Welcome back to Dad's real-life revenge. Grab a glass of water, a few snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every opportunity to do the right thing, they simply chose not to. Leave a comment with the number 1 so we can continue the story, and hit subscribe. You're going to love this one. The doorbell rang once again. Ding dong. But the 2 predators outside still weren't ready to leave. Meredith slowly wandered among the flower displays. The sharp heels of her shoes tapped against the tiled floor. Click, click, click. Each sound felt like a hammer striking my temples. I stared at the yellow roses lying alone on the table. Today was December 13th. It was my wife's birthday, and also the anniversary of the day we had met 40 years ago. The $12 price wasn't because I was cheap. It was the cost of the first bouquet I had ever given her when we were both penniless. I had kept that tradition for 40 years. To me, it was a symbol of loyalty. I thought she understood, but it turned out that to Meredith it had been a form of torture. Meredith stopped in front of a large orchid arrangement. Her voice was ice cold as it echoed through the quiet flower shop. 40 years of being Garrick's wife means 40 years of living under his shadow. He controlled everything, from household spending to business decisions. He thinks he's some kind of savior, but he's nothing more than an old, outdated mind. I had to pretend to smile, pretend to appreciate every cheap gift he gave me. Preston, you have no idea how long I've waited for this day. I want to see that old man on his knees. I want him to understand what it feels like to have nothing left. Preston laughed, a low, cunning laugh. I understand, Mom. Men as arrogant as Garrick usually die from their own confidence. He believes loyalty can be bought with favors. Tonight I'm going to show him the highest level of legal strategy. He'll sign the resignation and transfer documents without a hint of suspicion. He thinks he's protecting his family. In reality, he's signing the death warrant for his own career. Meredith turned toward Preston. Her eyes sparkled with admiration. You've done well. You're far superior to Kendall. She's too weak and too foolish. She always worshipped her father. But we managed to separate her from the old man. Now, Garrick is alone. He has no one left to rely on except us. In the darkness of the storage room, my chest heaved violently. I had to clamp a hand over my mouth to stop a scream of rage from escaping. The instincts of a man who had survived 40 years in the business world roared inside my mind. They had driven a wedge between me and Kendall. My poor daughter. That bitter truth made my head spin. I had trusted Meredith. I had doubted my own daughter. I had pushed Kendall away because of the poisonous words of the woman who shared my bed. Their footsteps gradually faded. A door closed. Their car engine started and sped away, leaving behind a deadly silence inside the flower shop. I pushed open the storage room door and stepped out. My legs gave way beneath me. Silas rushed forward and caught me. He didn't say a word. He had always been that way. A former detective, he had stood quietly beside me for decades. He guided me into the small kitchen behind the shop. On the old wooden table, Silas slowly placed something down. It was a worn blue leather notebook. Silas looked directly into my eyes. His voice trembled with restraint. "Garrick, this is why I made you hide in there. What you just heard was only the tip of the iceberg. Their betrayal began 7 months ago." He placed his hand on the notebook. "And all the evidence is right here." My hands trembled as I took Silas's blue-covered notebook. It felt heavy, as though I were holding my entire life in my hands, moments away from falling apart. The smell of old paper and dust filled my nose. Every page had been carefully numbered by Silas in red ink. Each page was a report, and every report was a fatal stab wound. Silas sat down across from me. He didn't look me in the eye. Instead, he stared into empty space. "Garrick, for the past 7 months I've been watching Preston. He isn't just an ambitious lawyer. He's a cold-blooded predator. He secretly met with Meredith 18 times in this flower shop. Every meeting was a new scheme." I turned the pages. Photographs appeared. Meredith and Preston. They were sitting in a secluded corner of a cafe near my office. They were studying property maps. They were exchanging folders containing documents bearing my signature. I froze when I saw a black and white photocopy. It was a corporate ownership transfer agreement. At the bottom of the page was my signature. Clear, perfect. A signature I had never placed on any document. A violent shiver ran through me. When had they forged my signature? Shock consumed my ability to think. Meredith didn't just want money. She wanted to strip away the entire legacy I had spent my life building. Why, Silas? Why would she do this? I gave her everything. A life of luxury, respect, a loving family. Silas sighed. He flipped to the final page. There, attached to the report, was a voluntary waiver agreement. Meredith had signed it. She had formally acknowledged that every action Preston took had been done with her full consent. The ingratitude was more vicious than any betrayal I had ever witnessed in business. She wasn't merely my wife. She was an accomplice. I stared at Meredith's face in one of the photographs. She was still beautiful. She still wore that gentle smile. But now all I could see was a terrifying disguise. I had lived beside a venomous snake for 40 years without ever realizing it. Suddenly Silas pointed to a note written at the bottom of the last page. Another name appeared there. A name I never expected to see. Attorney Vance. He wasn't Preston's representative. He was the man pulling the strings behind the entire operation. My heart tightened. I realized Preston was only a pawn. The person truly behind everything was far more dangerous. He knew every weakness in business law that I had overlooked. He had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The horrifying truth sent a chill down my spine. I had lost everything. But perhaps I had finally found my real enemy. Silas looked at me meaningfully. "Garrick Preston isn't the greatest threat. He's only the executor. The real mastermind is much closer than you think. He's waiting for you at tonight's party. He's preparing a move that you could never anticipate." I tightened my grip on the blue notebook. My anger had transformed into something far more frightening. A cold, absolute calm. If they wanted to play this game, I would show them who truly wrote the rules. Rain suddenly began drumming against the metal roof of the flower shop. The steady patter pulled me back to reality. I leaned against the old wooden chair, and my mind drifted back 10 years to the day Preston first entered my family's life. It had been an autumn afternoon. He arrived as Kendall's boyfriend. His expensive suit was perfectly tailored. His Harvard law degree earned with honors was casually mentioned within the first 10 minutes of conversation. Back then, Preston seemed flawless in everyone's eyes. A promising young professional. Polite, charming. He had a smile that could light up a room. But the instincts of a man who had spent decades navigating the business world sounded a faint warning bell. I remember that dinner clearly. While Kendall was busy in the kitchen, Preston pulled his chair closer to mine. He didn't ask about Kendall's hobbies. He didn't ask about her favorite foods. His very first questions were directed at the financial structure of my company. He asked about trusts. He asked how I planned to distribute shares among my heirs. At the time, I dismissed my suspicions. I scolded myself for being overly cynical. I told myself he was simply a bright young man, with a sharp interest in business. It was the greatest mistake of my life. I chose my love for my daughter over trusting my survival instincts. I opened my door to a wolf because I wanted my daughter to be happy. Now sitting in Silas's kitchen, I finally understood the truth. Preston had been planning this for 10 years. He hadn't approached Kendall because he loved her. He approached her because he smelled money. He smelled the fortune I had spent 40 years building. Regret gnawed at my mind. I had spoiled Meredith too much. I had trusted Preston's credentials too much. I had allowed the illusion of a warm family to blind the keen judgment of an investor. That carelessness had led me here. An old man hiding in a storage room, listening to his wife and son-in-law plot to steal his legacy. I clenched my fists. My knuckles cracked. The pain transformed into a slow-burning fire of anger. Preston believed he was the smartest predator in the room. He believed his Harvard degree could outmaneuver my 40 years of hard-earned experience. He was wrong. Completely wrong. Silas placed a cup of hot tea into my hands. His voice grew quieter. "Garrick, do you know why Meredith followed Preston so easily?" He paused. "It wasn't just about money. Preston possessed another weapon. A weapon that has been destroying the relationship between you and Kendall for the past 2 years." I looked up at him. A chill ran down my spine. For 2 years, Kendall had looked at me with resentment in her eyes. She had cut off all contact with me. I thought she had simply changed. But she hadn't. Silas opened another page in the blue notebook. It was a printed email. He slid it across the table toward me. The truth was finally emerging. For 2 years, I had been living inside a swamp of lies, and now the truth about the forged messages from a woman named Brioni was about to explode right before my eyes. My eyes remained fixed on the printed pages spread across the table. Messages, photographs. Every piece of evidence revolved around me and a woman named Brioni. I had never met this woman. I didn't even know who she was. Yet 2 years ago on Kendall's phone screen, Brioni appeared as my secret mistress. Silas slammed his hand against my shoulder. His voice burned with anger. Meredith used a burner phone. She wrote every one of those fake messages herself. She sent them to Kendall through accounts linked to Brioni. She wanted Kendall to believe you were a cheater, a terrible father who had betrayed the woman who stood by him for 40 years. My sense of reality collapsed. The bitter pieces of the past began falling into place. I remembered a winter night 2 years earlier. Snow and wind battered the windows. I drove to Kendall's house because I missed my granddaughter Maeve. I wanted to bring her a few small toys. As I stood outside the house, I could see through the warm yellow glow of the living room window. Kendall was crying. Preston stood beside her with his arms around her. The moment I stepped onto the porch, Kendall rushed outside. She looked at me with the most disgusted expression I had ever seen. "Don't come in here. I don't have a father as disgusting as you. Go back to your mistress." At the time, I was stunned. I had no idea what I had done wrong. I tried to explain, but Meredith called at that exact moment. She was sobbing hysterically, begging me to leave the family alone. Their performance had been perfectly coordinated. Together they had cornered me. I quietly returned to my car and drove away into that freezing night. I isolated myself because I believed my daughter had changed. For 2 years I carried that injustice alone. Now I knew the truth. It had all been a carefully engineered campaign of manipulation. They wanted to sever the only support system I had left. They wanted me isolated, broken, emotionally vulnerable, easy to control. Meredith's cruelty went far beyond ordinary greed. She was willing to sacrifice her own daughter's happiness to fuel her ambitions. My chest rose and fell heavily. But amid the wreckage, I felt something new awakening inside me. A cold strength. The calm of a man who no longer had anything left to lose. They had stolen 2 years of my relationship with my daughter. They had turned me into a monster in the eyes of the child I loved most. The oath of honor I had lived by all my life stirred within me once again. I would make them pay. 10 times over. Silas glanced at the clock hanging on the wall. Then he leaned closer. Garrick, the birthday party begins in 2 hours. Preston is in a hurry. He can't afford to wait another day. Do you know why he's so desperate to make you sign those documents tonight? I looked up at him. The seriousness in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't merely about greed. This was something much bigger. Preston was carrying a ticking time bomb. Silas lowered his voice even further. What he revealed next sent a chill through my entire body. Preston's problem isn't just money. He's running out of time. Silas slid another document across the table. At this very moment, a $280,000 secret is hanging over his head. And whatever that secret was, it had become dangerous enough to drive him into a desperate gamble. Silas flipped to another document printed from an underground banking account. His voice was barely above a whisper, as cold as the rain falling outside. Preston owes $280,000. Gambling debts. He burned through his savings betting on Premier League matches. Now the loan sharks are hunting him. I stared at the figures on the page. Suspicious transactions. Screenshots of threatening messages sent to Preston. The mob had given him an ultimatum. If he failed to transfer the money before midnight, he would end up in a hospital bed. Or worse. They would break the elegant lawyer piece by piece, starting with his fingers. So that was why he was in such a hurry. The Harvard degree. The perfectly tailored suits. The polished image. It was all a decaying disguise wrapped around a desperate gambler. He wasn't a brilliant predator. He was a cornered animal. He needed my house. He needed my real estate holdings as collateral. Immediately. Without my signature tonight, Preston's entire world would collapse. Does Meredith know about any of this? I asked quietly. My voice had become cold. Silas shook his head. No. Meredith is being manipulated just as thoroughly as everyone else. She thinks Preston is helping her take control away from you. She has no idea she's aiding a man who is on the verge of complete ruin. She believes she's building a new empire. In reality, she's burying herself alongside a future criminal. Disgust rose inside me. Meredith, a woman who had always prided herself on her intelligence and sophistication, was being deceived by her own son-in-law. That was the price of greed. When greed clouds judgment, people stop recognizing the monster standing beside them. I slowly rose from my chair and adjusted my collar. The fear, the shock, the heartbreak, all of it was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Clarity. My business instincts had returned. I understood the structure of a battle better than anyone. Preston was rushing. And the person who rushes is always the person who makes mistakes. He needed my signature to save his own skin. He believed tonight would be his crowning victory. He believed a lonely old man like me would surrender without resistance. He was wrong. I looked at Silas and allowed myself a cold smile. Thank you, old friend. You've given me the most powerful weapon imaginable. Silas nodded. The truth. The truth, I repeated. Now it was time to prepare the real birthday gift for my wife. A gift neither she nor Preston would ever forget for the rest of their lives. I stepped out of the flower shop carrying the $12 bouquet of yellow roses. The rain was still falling, but my mind had never been clearer. I would attend that party. I would watch them perform their little play. I would smile. I would listen, and when the moment was right, I would bring down the curtain myself. I sat in my car as the windshield wipers swept back and forth with a steady rhythm. The glow of distant streetlights filtered through the windshield and into the cabin. My eyes settled on the legal folder resting on the passenger seat. 6 months earlier, a feeling of unease had pushed me to act. The instincts of a man who had survived 40 years in business rarely failed him. I had quietly met with my own attorney. Not Attorney Vance. Not the man conspiring with them. 6 months ago, I established an irrevocable charitable trust. The entire process was conducted in complete secrecy. One by one, I transferred every family property into that trust. The cash reserves, the corporate shares. Everything. Legally speaking, Garrick no longer owned any significant assets. I was merely the acting administrator, and that changed everything. It meant every document Preston intended to force me to sign tonight was worthless. He could pressure me, threaten me, forge my signature 1,000 times. It would not matter. The vault he believed he was stealing from had been empty for months. Every meaningful asset had already been moved beyond the reach of my son-in-law and my treacherous wife. That silent reversal was my deadliest move. A faint smile crossed my lips, a smile without warmth. Preston needed $280,000 before midnight if he wanted to keep his fingers intact. He was betting his entire future on tonight's paperwork. But my legal trap would transform his confidence into his worst nightmare. He believed he had cornered me. In reality, he was the one balancing on a fraying rope. The same was true for Meredith. She wanted to see me kneel. She wanted me reduced to a lonely old man with nothing left. But greed had blinded her. Hatred had blinded her. She had willingly signed an agreement making herself Preston's accomplice. She didn't realize she had already helped dig her own grave. I checked my watch. It was time for the birthday party. 12 guests were already waiting at the mansion. Old friends, business associates, people they intended to use as witnesses in their carefully staged performance. They wanted tonight to become a public humiliation, a false courtroom where I would be pressured into submission. I intended to give them exactly the performance they expected. I would play the role of the frail old man, the confused husband, the vulnerable victim, right up until the final moment. If you've stayed with this story this far, then perhaps you've found it interesting. Please take a quick moment to help us out, like and subscribe. Leave a comment with the number 5 so I know you've made it this far, and tell me your prediction for how the story will end to see if you're right. Many people watch without doing so, but it costs nothing and means a great deal to us. I stepped out of the car. The mansion stood before me, glowing with light. I took a deep breath. The sound of classical music drifted from inside. Then I pushed open the front door. But the instant I stepped across the threshold, Attorney Vance's eyes swept toward me. A victorious smile appeared on his face. And suddenly I realized their plan was far more complicated than I had imagined. A chill settled in my stomach. I had uncovered the betrayal. I had uncovered the gambling debts. I had uncovered the forged messages. Yet the confidence in Vance's expression suggested something else, something bigger, something I still didn't know. And as the door closed behind me, only one question echoed through my mind. What had I missed? The chandelier lights in the living room were dazzlingly bright. The scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of fine wine. The 12 guests gathered inside were all influential figures in the business world. They stood laughing and chatting as though nothing in the world could possibly go wrong. Meredith approached me wearing an elegant blue evening gown. She smiled brightly, but her eyes were ice cold. "Oh, Garrick, there you are. Everyone's been waiting for you." She took the bouquet of yellow roses from my hands, glanced at it for less than a second, and casually handed it to a waiter. Exactly as I expected. Preston stood beside Attorney Vance. The Harvard lawyer wore the confident smile of a man who believed victory was already his. He gave Vance a slight nod. Immediately the attorney opened his leather briefcase and removed a thick stack of documents. Preston stepped forward. His voice carried across the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, on the occasion of Meredith's 60th birthday, we have a special announcement. Due to health concerns and a desire to spend more time with his family, Garrick has decided to transfer all estate planning authority and corporate management responsibilities to Meredith and me." Whispers spread throughout the room. Eyes turned toward me. Some surprised, some curious, some calculating. Meredith took my hand. Her fingers were cold. The grip was tight enough to feel like a steel clamp. Her voice was sweet and artificial as she leaned closer. "Sign it, Garrick. You're tired. Let Preston carry the burden now. This is what's best for our family. For Kendall. For little Maeve. They were using my daughter and granddaughter as weapons. Even now. Even here. 2 years earlier that tactic might have broken me. But not tonight." I looked directly into Meredith's eyes. All I saw was greed. Then I turned toward Preston. His smile remained in place. But now I noticed something else. His hands were trembling. Ever so slightly. He kept checking the expensive watch on his wrist. 10 o'clock. Time was running out. The loan sharks were waiting. I slowly walked toward the glass table positioned in the center of the room. Preston hurried forward, and placed a fountain pen into my hand. He pointed at the signature line. "Sign it, Dad." "Everything is ready." Attorney Vance stepped beside me. He lowered his head and spoke quietly enough that only I could hear. "Mr. Garrick, I strongly advise you to sign. Otherwise, the financial report detailing the missing company funds from 2 years ago will be delivered directly to the prosecutor's office tomorrow morning. At your age, prison would be a very unpleasant experience." I froze. The pen nearly slipped from my fingers. The fabricated financial report. This was their final weapon. They weren't merely trying to steal my assets. They were trying to destroy my life. If I resisted, they intended to send me to prison. Their cruelty had no limit. Slowly I lifted my eyes, and then I saw her. Kendall. She had just entered the room. Standing beside her was Silas. The hatred that had filled her eyes for the past 2 years was gone. In its place were shock, regret, and tears streaming down her cheeks. For a brief moment the room disappeared. The guests, the documents, the threats, everything faded away. My daughter had finally learned the truth. I looked at Preston, who was secretly smiling to himself. I looked at Meredith, who was silently urging me to sign. Then I looked at Attorney Vance, the mastermind, the man who believed he had already won. Very slowly I lowered the pen. But instead of signing the document, I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. The room fell silent. I removed a small black voice recorder. Preston's smile faltered. Meredith frowned. Vance's eyes narrowed. And without saying a single word, I pressed the play button. A burst of static crackled from the small black recorder. Then Meredith's voice filled the room. "Old Garrick always thinks these outdated things can make up for his lack of imagination. The old man will have nothing left except this $12 bouquet." A second voice followed. Preston's. He spoke about the estate documents, the transfer plan, the scheme to take everything. Every word echoed through the mansion. The enormous living room fell into a deadly silence. The classical music continued playing softly in the background, but nobody paid attention anymore. Meredith's face drained of color. She stumbled backward. Her lips trembled. No words came out. Preston stood frozen. The polished Harvard image he had spent years constructing shattered instantly. At that exact moment, police sirens erupted from outside the mansion gates. Blue and red lights flashed through the tall glass windows. The front doors swung open. A team of officers and federal agents entered. Leading them was a special investigator. "Preston, you are under arrest for financial fraud, extortion, and conspiracy involving organized criminal enterprises." The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room. The elegant hands of my son-in-law were locked behind his back. Preston exploded in panic. "Vance, do something. You're my lawyer." But Attorney Vance was in no better position. The investigator turned toward him. "And you as well, Attorney Vance. You are being charged with conspiracy to commit document fraud and participation in activities covered under organized crime statutes." Vance completely collapsed. The stack of documents slipped from his hands and scattered across the floor. Preston turned toward me. His eyes were bloodshot. Wild. "Old man, you think you've won. Even if I go to prison, you'll lose everything. These documents were already effective. All your assets belong to me now. I'll use them to pay my debts." I walked toward him slowly. Then I looked directly into his eyes. "Preston, you forgot one thing." The room became silent again. 40 years in business taught me how to prepare for wolves." His expression faltered. 6 months ago, I established an irrevocable charitable trust. Every property, every corporate share, everything was transferred long before tonight. The color vanished from his face. "Nothing you forced me to sign tonight matters. Nothing you forged matters. Every document you've been chasing is worthless." I took another step closer. "The safe you were desperate to rob has been empty for a very long time." The words struck him like a final blow. Preston's knees buckled. He collapsed onto the floor. It was 10:30 at night. His time had run out. Not only had he lost the fortune he thought he was stealing, he now faced prison, and the wrath of the people waiting for their money. Meredith suddenly rushed toward me. Tears streamed down her face. "Garrick, please, please help me. I'm your wife." I pulled my arm away without hesitation. The last remnants of sympathy I once felt had been exhausted long ago. Across the room, Kendall ran toward me. She wrapped her arms around me and broke down in tears. "Dad, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I believed those fake messages. I held my daughter tightly. For the first time in 2 years, she was finally back in my arms. The warmth of that moment washed away years of pain. The truth had been exposed. Meredith's web of lies had completely collapsed. Officers escorted Preston and Vance out of the mansion. Meredith remained on the floor, alone, surrounded by 12 guests who now looked at her with open contempt. For a moment I glanced at the $12 bouquet resting on a nearby table. The same bouquet that had once symbolized 40 years of loyalty. Then I reached for Kendall's hand. Without another word, the two of us walked out of that house together. The first light of dawn peeked through the rows of trees. I sat in my familiar office. The gray files of legal disputes were gone. In their place rested the documents transferring full management authority of the trust to Kendall. My daughter deserved this legacy. She had endured far too much pain because of the lies spread by her own mother. Maeve's cheerful laughter echoed down the hallway. A moment later she burst into the room and wrapped her arms around my neck. The warmth of my granddaughter's embrace washed away the bitterness that had lived inside me for so long. I placed a yellow rose into her small hands. Today its color was no longer treated with contempt. It had become a symbol of renewal, a symbol of forgiveness, a symbol of hope. Meredith now spent her days alone in a small rented house. Most of her resources had been drained by legal expenses. Regret arrived too late to restore the reputation she had destroyed. She chose greed. She chose betrayal. And in return, she lost the trust of her own daughter. Preston and Attorney Vance were both facing 20-year federal prison sentences. The arrogance of the Harvard-educated lawyer had finally collided with the reality of the law. Looking back on everything that had happened, I learned a lesson written in scars. Never allow blind affection to silence your instincts or your judgment. The most dangerous people are sometimes the ones standing closest to you. They use the language of family to weaken your defenses. Love with all your heart, but protect what you build with a clear mind. Protecting your life's work is not selfish. It is often the only way to safeguard the future and happiness of the people you truly love. That $12 bouquet saved me, because it revealed the truth hidden beneath years of deception. Justice had been served. The guilty had paid the price, and the values that truly define a family had finally returned to their rightful place. For the first time, in a very long while, I could look toward the future and smile with pride. We're grateful that you joined Dad's real-life revenge, all the way to the end of this story. Become part of our community by liking and subscribing for more powerful emotional stories centered on family betrayal and justice. And as always, thank you for being a part of this space.